Welcome to Professor Sky's Spam Channel, where I talk about anything that is not new music. And once again, I'm going to be talking about soccer. I use the term soccer, not football, because I just like this old English term that we use here. And so I'm going to be talking about this match that's coming up on Wednesday. Morocco versus France. And if the match has already happened, this video is still important for talking about the socio-political nature of soccer, of football. That's what makes the World Cup so interesting and different than other events. Because you're not just rooting for teams, you're rooting for countries, and in a way you're rooting for what those countries represent, or what the players on those teams represent about their countries. That's why I explained not only do I root for France because I'm a French professor and I spent a lot of time in France, but also for the socio-political aspect of the team, which I'll get into again in detail on this episode. But that's why I won't root for Serbia. Even though my wife is Serbian and my kids are half Serbian, you'd think I'd root for Serbia, but no. To support the Serbian national team is to support Serbian nationalism. A lot of the players are overtly nationalist. A lot of them support the evil and crooked regime that is in charge right now of Serbia. So it's not that simple. It's not just like, I am this, therefore I like that. I'm making this video for Americans. I know statistically mostly Europeans are going to watch this because they love seeing Americans talk about footy, which I am. But Americans have a hard time. If you're American, just bear with me here, because the socio-political aspect of sport in America is largely not about the teams. It's about the players. Obviously, the LeBron versus Jordan debate is essentially a question of whether or not African-American entertainers should have a voice in society. But in general, when it comes to teams, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, I guess in baseball, we might have the Cubs versus the White Sox, where one team, the Cubs, is generally suburban and white in its fan base, and the White Sox, who are from the South Side, are generally non-white, generally working class or lower class. But, it's not like the players on the team are from those different parts of Chicago. But that's totally different when it comes to soccer, and especially the World Cup. So I was all prepared to root for France all the way through. No problem. I have no problem rooting for France against Australia, against Poland, against all these other countries. But Morocco. So the whole debate has happened in my house. Who are we going to root for Wednesday afternoon? My son, who loves political science, loves history, knows obviously there's one clear answer. And I'm here to complicate that clear answer. But the clear answer, in case you're wondering, is of course you're going to root for Morocco. Of course you're going to root for a colony versus a colonizer, right? The colonized versus the colonizer. Let's not forget this image that's been posted quite a bit on the internet of Le Petit Journal, a right-wing newspaper in France, when France colonized Morocco. Okay? And you see the image of France showing up in all these weird cartoonish images of Moroccans barely knowing how to read, despite the fact that they are and have been a very advanced civilization. France is going to be able to freely bring to Morocco civilization, richness, and peace. So, is rooting for France rooting for this person, rooting for this newspaper? On a surface level, yeah, it is. So let's root for Morocco. This is the furthest an African team has ever made it in the World Cup, which they will tell you over and over again. But, it's not that simple. Now, Morocco is on a historical run, defeating 2 colonizers in a row, with Spain and Portugal going up against their third colonizer. That's a clean sweep. And that's a story which the simplicity is alluring. It's really, really, really alluring. And I want to just jump on the train along with my son. But it's not so simple. Because in reality, no matter who I root for, I can't lose. My values, my morality, which I will share with you in a second, is not going to lose, because both of them bear witness, either France wins or Morocco wins, in these central tenets that I believe for a good society and a healthy world. Multiculturalism, the existence of a melting pot, minimalized borders, expanded immigration, cultural pluralism, complexity, diversity, cosmopolitan countries. All of these things are what I want. I want all cultures in this entire world to be bombarded by other cultures constantly, constantly growing and evolving in interesting ways. That is the value of being an American, is I get to live where this experiment happened. And of course, the experiment was built through the death of the native population and through the death and blood of the exploited. But in the state that we're in now, we are proof of what multiculturalism, what a true melting pot can be. A victory for France is not a victory for Europeans. It is not a victory for the French. It is a victory for diverse Europe. It is victory for an Africanized Europe, which the far right wing has been telling all of France and all of Europe for centuries is the biggest danger they can possibly have. But this is the thing. Yes, a victory for Morocco is a victory for Africa. Sort of. But if you look under the hood, you look a little more carefully, it's also a victory for a diverse Europe. It is also a victory for an Africanized Europe. Let's start off with the French team. I've talked about this before, but there exists in France a real diversity. So if you think of France and you think of just some guy with a thin mustache and a baguette and a little hat, I'm sorry to say, your ideas are outmoded. French culture has evolved. It has maintained everything that made it French. You can eat as much cheese and drink as much wine and enjoy as much art as you can possibly handle, okay? French culture is alive and well in its traditional form, but it has also evolved with these other influences that come from its previous colonies. A result. I would argue a happy result. So when we talk about the players of France, we're talking about black, blanc, beurre. That's the expression that's used all the time to talk about, well, actually, I think it was first used to talk about hip-hop music. Because it all goes back to hip-hop, because hip-hop is the most dominant art form in the world, and part of the reason why is because it promotes this kind of diversity across the globe. Black, taking the English word, meaning of sort of sub-Saharan African origins, blanc, meaning white, of European origins, and beurre, meaning Arab. It's the word Arab inversed. It's a French slang called verlan. And so it just means black, white, and Arab. And that is the truth of French hip-hop. That's what makes it so interesting, is that it's the mixture of all three. It reflects the cosmopolitan truth of France back to France itself and out to the world, being the number 2 producer of hip-hop in the world. Take that, England. Take that, Canada. Take that everywhere else. France is number 2 because it embraced its multiculturalism and its diversity, okay? In a country which is resistant. But that's how the soccer team is as well. That's the crazy coincidence that right as the National Front was rising in France and prejudice against African immigrants was going through the roof, there was the explosion, the golden era of French hip-hop, and France won its first World Cup team with members of the team of African origins. Okay? So there are a lot of citizens of France who think that only white people are French. Okay? There's a lot of them. A lot. Okay? And I'm not saying it's simple. Don't compare it to American racism. It's not the same. It's not the same kind of racism. We have our own brand of racism in America, which I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to talk about, as an outsider, how I observe the difference with French racism. And one of these ideas is the sense of nationality. America has a lot of flaws. One of the things that is not a flaw is how we accept people as Americans. Because our entire nation was started, of course, by eliminating the native population in a disgraceful way. After that, we were a generation of immigrants, some forced, some not. But that meant that what an American was not fixed by race, was not fixed by ethnicity, was not fixed by religion. Of course, there were dominant races, dominant religions. I'm not trying to say an Irish person could show up being Catholic in 1914 and not experience discrimination. Of course. But in general, we have the belief that you can become American, right? That's the belief. My wife is going to be American before the end of her life, all right? And she doesn't even feel Serbian because it's a complicated thing with I think her grandmother was Slovakian, whatever it is. Everywhere else in the world that's not America has a much more rigid sense of nationality. You can never become French. You can never become Chinese. You can never become Brazilian. right? Like, you can't just become that. You have to be born that. So, what do we do with this French team? This French team of people who feel as though they are not French enough for the French. I guarantee you, every non-white player who grew up in France and who's playing on that team has experienced severe systematic racism of the worst kind. Being stopped by the police, asked for their papers, condescension from teachers, just general living conditions, marginalization through city planning, marginalization through all that, okay? But at the same time, they represent France. And it's a beautiful team because it is this mixture of all three. There are black players, there are Beurre players, and there are Blanc players, right? I mean, the best Beurre player, unfortunately, is injured at the moment, but still, all right? So a victory for France is a victory for an Africanized France. But don't you go thinking that that's not the case for Morocco as well. Morocco represents Africa, which is awesome. But most of their talent was trained and grown in Europe. That doesn't mean European society is superior and that's how they're good at the football, any more than African players are superior at the football. The truth is, it's the mixing that makes the strength. That's what makes the strength. It is this cosmopolitan society. Their coach, Ouarlid Regragui, I don't know how to pronounce his name in any language, he is so French. To me, he is so French. He's the coach of Morocco, but he grew up in a suburb called Essonne, the same place where Nino and Cynique and Zola, all these great French rappers came from. And all these great French rappers all had the same story. They grew up in this, well, most of them had the same story. They grew up in a suburb in a sort of low-cost housing where a lot of recent immigrants and lower economically standard people go, pushed out to the outsides, and then they somehow managed through their ingenuity and intelligence and strength and perseverance to overcome that, to achieve some kind of fame and financial stability. That's the history of French rap. And this guy is from one of those suburbs. So I understand he's the coach for Morocco. And he is the best coach in the world. He is showing everybody that he is the best coach in the world. Now, I'm not a soccer expert, so you go ahead and tell me, I don't know, whatever, that guy for Barcelona, Pacapui and Pacapligi, whatever, I don't care. But you're trying to tell me that this guy who's coaching a team that is barely ranked to beat all these great, he very clearly has this defensive genius. And it's not that he's French and not Moroccan. It's not that he's Moroccan, that he's not French. It's that he is both. The whole team is like that. One of their best players, Saïs, born in France. The goalie, who's the best goalie in the competition, he's from Montreal, which goes even deeper into understanding like Canadian immigration policy, which is in some ways more forgiving, in some ways less forgiving than American. But the fact that there's a common language there with French probably is the reason why he ended up in Montreal as opposed to maybe in Toronto, okay? Bouffard is from Paris. Of course, they have a couple players from Morocco, several players, some from the Netherlands. Kind of bizarre, but in all of these cases, what we have is this evidence that this society where these borders are more open and people are able to go from place to place means that these teams that are supposed to represent Africa and Europe represent Africa and Europe. It's awesome. I can't lose. I can't. There's no way for me to watch this result and not be happy. So the question is, who am I rooting for? Well, before I tell you who I'm rooting for, I want to show you this wonderful video of Mbappe. Now, unfortunately, it's in English because English linguistic hegemony is a real thing. But the best player for Morocco, not the best, but one of the best players, Hakimi, who's going to be defending Mbappe, who is the best player in the world right now, right? So Mbappe is of Algerian and Cameroonian descent, grew up in France, a place called Bondy, outside of Paris. He represents the hopes and dreams of a lot of non-European origin French people. He is the most famous French person in the world, and he does not look like he's wearing a beret and having a thin mustache, okay? And the fact that like he represents both Algeria and Cameroon in terms of his ancestry means that like the entire continent of Africa, in a way, has a claim to his greatness. You understand? like sub-Saharan and Saharan Africa at the same time. It's amazing. It's like he was created in a lab to perfectly represent the complexity of our decolonized world and our cosmopolitan European centers and the value of cosmopolitan beliefs, diversity. And Hakimi is the Spanish-born player who is going to be defending him, who's playing for Morocco. Now, the great thing is Hakimi beat Spain, which I think was a victory for Spain because he learned how to play in Madrid. I think, or Barcelona, I think it's Madrid. You know, like he was trained in Spain to learn how to play the Spanish system and use that to beat Spain. So if you're a Spaniard and you're like, I can't believe Morocco won, don't worry, you also won. If France gets beaten by the best coach in the world, don't worry, France has also won. So here he is talking about his teammate because he happens to play for Paris Saint-Germain, my least favorite team in the Ligue 1, because I root for Marseille, but still I like Mbappe. So I sort of like them too now. It's confusing. Watch my other video for more about that. But like, here he is talking before the game against Tunisia. And he's sort of talking about, because Tunisia also has a long history with France, and he actually predicts this match where he talks about how he's going to have to defeat his teammate on Paris Saint-Germain. So he plays for Paris, Hakimi plays for Paris. He plays for France, Hakimi plays for Morocco. And this is just a couple of guys goofing around, BSing.
We are here in the stadium, Education City Stadium, good. 40,000 people can be there. French Tunisia. I hope we're gonna win. And after we play against Morocco, and I have to destroy my friend.
I'm gonna kick you.
That will break my heart a little bit, but you know the football. It is what it is. It is what it is. I have to kill him.
So, there it is. A victory for Europe, a victory for Africa, no matter how it ends. So who am I going to root for? I'm going to root for France. I love these players. I've been watching this team for so long. I like all of them. I thought that Chouameni goal was amazing, which, by the way, I've watched a lot of French coverage of the game. There's a lot of racism in the French press. They're giving a lot more credit to Giroud for his goal as opposed to Chouameni for that insane goal, which is one of the most insane. Maybe I just don't know enough about soccer to understand, like, how is that not like the greatest goal you've ever seen? He was like 75,000 yards away and he kicked the ball. Anyways, I'm because I like the whole team. Varane, Koundé, Giroud, Griezmann. I've followed this team. So I'm going to root for the team. I'm going to do it with an easy conscience. All right. Was that fun? Was that good? Was that interesting? Allez les bleus. And if France loses, I will be so happy as well. And I will just pray that Morocco beats Croatia or Argentina. Till next time, there's the camera.